right, so welcome to the first lab of Chemistry A, Chromatography. These recordings, I will do one of these for each of our labs. Things that I'm going to do, I'm going to walk you through what on the website you need to pay attention to, where to get the files for your assignments. I'll also walk you through what equipment out of your kits that you need, what possible other items not in your kits you might need. There's a few household kind of lying around things you might need to grab. And then I'll walk you through actually setting up the lab. I won't do the whole thing for you. You'll have to finish it from there. But that way you have kind of a walkthrough guide for at least getting going and set up. So let's start with getting the materials off the web page. So here we're on the home page. There's a couple of ways you can get to this lab. You can click on the Study of Chemistry Unit 1 folder over here in Class Content, and then scroll down to the lab 1.09. Or you can go to the class plan, make sure you're looking at month view, and find 1.09 on there. For my page, chemistry is in green. So I'll click here and click more. All right, so as far as these different pages here, we have the lesson introduction, which is really just a very basic introduction, getting you kind of into the idea of what we're doing, why we're doing it, setting goals and things like that. Couple of materials. The student guide is going to have some questions that might help you as far as taking notes on what chromatography is, but it doesn't actually have anything specific to the lab in there. These laboratory guidelines are the same for every single lab. They're just general safety guidelines, that sort of thing. And then there is a nice all-in-one place list of materials. Okay, so this is a great place to start. It helps a little bit because in the lab manual, which you got with your kits, that one has lists of materials, but sometimes they're split up into more than one. So there's lesson introduction. The next one, laboratory. The next thing that starts with the word laboratory, it doesn't have the word investigation in there. This is usually where you take some notes. It's telling you about what the lab is. In this case, it's explaining what chromatography is. Okay, gives you some vocab terms that might come in handy when you're reading the questions and you need something. They have a question about solvent, you want to know what that is, that sort of thing. This page, because I'm doing the recording right now, doesn't have the recording yet, but this is going to be where your recordings will be to help as far as setting up the lab and getting all your materials. The investigation area. So this, again, has that list of materials, so you don't necessarily need it out of the lesson introduction, and again, a copy of those guidelines. And this is where things get a little bit confusing. You are in a hands-on lab class, so you do need to do this with the hands-on materials. There is a virtual version of every single lab. Sometimes they line up really, really well with what you're supposed to be doing by hand. Sometimes they're a little bit different. Like in this case, you're still doing chromatography here, but it's slightly different setup as far as the procedure would go. If you absolutely have to do a virtual version of the lab, you do need to contact me, right? Because I know there's going to be times when maybe what you should have lying around the house materials aren't actually something you have lying around the house. We can discuss possibly doing a partial virtual option, something like that, so that you're still able to get the hands-on credit. Okay. Then this first Dropbox area, this is where you're going to get your lab report. All right, and these are the questions that you're going to have to answer and turn in. So go ahead and download that file. You can get it open and just leave it open on your computer. All right, I get this whole ability to edit here that you guys won't. And then the next one, this is the proof of the hands-on lab for Unit 1. So this is what I'm talking about. The virtual option is built in here. Because of that, this is primarily driven from Arizona State universities and other universities that require hands-on labs for students to be admitted to the schools, but it's also you're doing the hands-on version of this course. So I need proof that you actually did it hands-on. A couple of ways you can do that. You can't record yourself doing the lab. That's totally fine. You can take a couple of pictures, like a beginning, middle, end. As far as, especially showing me your final results of the lab, that's one way you can do it. Or if you really have no capabilities of doing either one of those, then you can write me a detailed couple of paragraphs explaining, what went well in the lab, maybe what procedure issues did you have problems with, what things did you do in order to prevent contamination of the materials, things like that. Enough information that I can tell you actually went through and did this by hand. Okay? But this is, regardless of whether or not you think you're going to a four-year university or not, this is a required part of the class. This is worth 5 points. The rest of the lab is worth 30. Okay? But this is worth 5 points that you will lose if you do not submit this. Okay? So there's your stuff from the website. Now we're going to move to your actual physical materials. So, hi. What I have here, I'm going to rotate this a little bit so that things are visible. First off, you're going to want your laboratory guide. Right, that says that down here. You're going to open it up to the very first lab, which is it starts on page 2. Okay. And then, so the way the laboratory guide is set up, there's actually, each part has its own material list. So there's a material list on page 3 and a material list on page 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take you through the things that you're going to need out of your kits. All right. In your kits, you should have 2 well plates. Right. Go ahead and take them out of the plastic that they're in. Get them, if they are at all dirty or something like that, clean them. One of mine definitely looked brand new, but the other one had probably some leftover chemicals from the last person who used it. So wash those out. You're going to need, there are 2 pieces of filter paper and plastic. Right? You're going to want to get those out and taken out of the plastic so that you have them ready, and I'll talk you through cutting those down later. There should be 3 smaller beakers, 100 milliliter beakers. Right, you're going to want those. There's a wooden dowel rod in your kit. You're going to want that. There should be a bag that has a bunch of these pipettes in there. You're going to want 3 of them, and I went ahead and labeled them: A for alcohol, B for vegetable oil, and W for water. Okay. There are 2 vials like this one. I'm trying to see if I can get the lighting good enough so that you can actually read that. But, because this is the part where things get a little tricky if you grab the wrong vial. I don't think I'm going to get... It says on here, ethanol 95% denatured ACS grade. All right, there's 2 of these. We may just need 1 of them, but go ahead and grab both of them so you have them handy. But you want to make sure that that's what it says on the container. Ethanol 95% denatured ACS grade. Okay, there should be a ruler in your kit. You want to grab that. And those are, I believe, everything out of the kit. Other things that you want that you should have somewhere in the house: a pair of scissors, preferably permanent markers. The thing is they need to not be washable, like Crayola markers. If you don't have these exact colors, that's fine. You just need 3 different colors. All right, I'm going with the colors that the lab suggests, but if you've got black, brown, and blue, go that route. All right, but 3 permanent markers of 3 different colors. Not in your kit, but something you need is vegetable oil. And then calls for distilled water. you can go out and purchase a gallon of distilled water. It's probably not something you have lying around the house. So if you don't have distilled water, what would be better than tap water would be filtered water, right? So I have a filter on my faucet, so I just have a bunch of water in a water bottle here. So if you can at least use filtered water, that would be better than your tap water. And if you're willing to go out and spend the money on distilled water, that would be awesome, but not required. Okay? All right, so that's everything we need for this particular lab. So we're going to start by setting up for part 1. All right, so looking at our list here, it talks about cutting the filter paper. Now their filter paper piece was actually a different size than ours, okay, because ours are actually all 10 centimeters tall already, right? And so this piece here is 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters, right? So what I did is if you want to, you can take the ruler and get really specific and measure out 1.2 centimeters. But based on having 10 centimeters and wanting 1.2, you can get 8 of those out of it, and then there's a little bit of leftover. So I just decided to kind of eyeball it here. I'm going to take this piece of paper, I'm going to cut it in half once, half again, and then each of these smaller strips in half one more time, and I'll get a total of 8 strips out of my filter paper, right? Try to get them as close to the same size as possible, but if they're not, it won't be the end of the world. So, and this actually gives you one more piece of paper than you actually need for the entire lab, because you need 3 for this first part and then 12 for the second part, and this will get you 16. So do that with both squares of your filter paper, that way you're just set and ready to go. And then we are going to need 3 of these for our experiment right now. All right, so here we've done part 1, we've cut it together. So using the black marker, mark 1 filter paper with a thick 0.5 centimeter dot of black ink approximately 2 centimeters from one end of the strip. All right, so that's where the ruler comes in, and you actually do want to measure this. Make sure you are using the centimeter side. On my particular ruler, there's a millimeter and a centimeter kind of marking on here. But if you're just kind of looking at it in general, the smaller ones versus the larger ones, smaller ones are centimeters. So from the bottom, I'm going to go measure 2 centimeters up. And then you're just going to make a nice big dot. Go ahead and make it kind of thick and big, okay? And then here, your next step, tape the other end of the strip to the center of the dowel so that the strip will hang horizontally when the dowel hang down when the dowel is held horizontally, right? Oh, and I'm sorry, I forgot to show you that as one of our materials before, but you'll want some tape. But again, that's something you should have probably lying around the house somewhere. So, take this strip. I'm going to give myself as much hanging space as possible. One thing to kind of check is you want to make sure that the paper is going to touch or get really, really close, preferably touch the bottom of the beaker when you have it hanging on there. So let me show you that there, all right? So you can see it's kind of hanging clearly, and then when I push it down, it actually does hit the bottom. So that's a good place to put this. So I'm just going to take the tape and make sure that that is affixed to the rod. Right? You can, if you need to adjust your lengths and stuff, you can roll the rod a little bit to lift it up or lower it down into the water. Eventually, there'll be liquid in there. All right, then you're going to repeat this till you have a strip with a red dot and a strip with a green dot. And those we're going to put at the ends of the dowel rod so we can have them in separate beakers. So let me get that set up real quick. So here's 2 more strips. I'm going to go ahead and just take care of my marker work now, and then we'll get those stuck to the rod. One thing, make sure you actually start from 0. I know my ruler actually doesn't have 0 at the very edge. It's a little bit to the right. So make sure you measure 2 centimeters from 0. There's the red dot. And these are permanent markers. So you might want to do these on top of something, since I'm noticing it's bleeding through and leaving a mark on my table here. Eventually that'll come up, but you might make your parents upset if it's an important table. All right. Now these, I'm going to try to make them hang the same length down as my black dot, because that'll make it easier to ensure that at all areas or in all 3 beakers, we end up having it in the water at the same level. We don't end up having, 2 in the water and 1 not. And just a little bit more tape to hold that down. So here's the red one. We're going to put the green one at about the same level as those 2. All right. So another thing, just to double check before I add liquids to my beakers, I'm going to make sure I can get all 3 of these into separate beakers. All right, that should be good. And they're all touching the bottom of the beaker, which means they will come in contact with the liquid when I add it in there. One thing, you just want to make sure that you're not going to have anything touching the side walls, just so that, the ink doesn't come off the paper onto your beaker. All right, so we have that set up. Now, moving on to step 5, pour the denatured alcohol into 3 beakers to a depth of about 1 centimeter. All right. Alrighty. So that's where our denatured alcohol comes in handy. If you look at your beakers there, you're probably going to shoot for this 20 milliliter mark. That's going to be about 1 centimeter. You actually might be okay with the one below it. That way you don't end up running out of alcohol. So if you haven't already, get the alcohol out of the plastic bag, and then there's a little piece of foil seal that you have to pop off. You can puncture through it, or if you have nails, you can probably pick it off. And it's going to smell great. I'm actually filling it to that. How is this pouring out? Oh, I got the foil off, but there's still a layer of plastic that's not off. There we go. And I'm just going to pour it to actually that very first line. That should be enough. Because I won't want to run out of alcohol. Which I believe then would be the 10 milliliter mark. Because I know my papers hang low enough to touch. One thing, since these are your kits, err on the side of conserving what you have versus using it all up, because once you run out, you run out. Alrighty, so I'm actually going to move these to a slightly different area because I'm going to have to let them sit for 20 minutes. So what I'm doing is I'm just moving them to the other side of my sink, making sure that my tape is holding, and I'm just going to get my strips down in there. Make sure that the bottom of the strip is in the liquid, but your dot is not submerged. If you submerge the dot, that's an issue. The alcohol will travel up the paper, eventually encompassing the dot. You just don't want the dot in the water or in the alcohol. Okay, so I'm a view here. So here I have them set up like that. So if you have a stopwatch, go ahead and start that for 20 minutes. I'm making note that it is 7:18 right now. So I will look back at that later. All right, so now we're going to move on to part 2 and get that set up. So this is the one where we need all of the other strips for. So you're going to have 12 strips in total. All right, you're going to set out 2 microplates. Place 1 strip of filter paper in each one. All right, there's 6 rows across, so you'll just have 1 per row. It'll look like this when you're done. All right. And then you can go ahead and make sure that they're all going to fit and have the ink and stuff on them. But then you're going to pull them all out and add in the liquids. All right, and this one's actually not, these instructions I feel like are pretty well put together. I'm just going to show you how to do the liquid part. But if you look at the table down here, all right, it tells you you're going to have 4 black strips, 4 red strips, 4 blue strips. You can stick to green like we were using in the experiment before. Or if you want to grab a blue marker, you can grab a blue marker. But you're going to be using these pipettes. All right, so that's what these guys are for. And then if you look at the pipette, you've got a 1, a 2, and a 3 milliliter mark. So these pipettes hold up to 3 milliliters. So half a pipette would be 1.5, which is going to be this mark right here, about halfway up the tube. All right, that way you kind of have an idea of where to suck the water up or suck the alcohol up. One thing, I have these labeled because you're going to want to use the alcohol pipette with alcohol only. All right, you're going to want to use the water pipette with water only. Don't contaminate them. All right, and same thing with the vegetable oil one, especially this vegetable oil one. Once you start using this for vegetable oil, it's going to be really hard to actually properly clean the vegetable oil off. So leave this one labeled because you're going to use vegetable oil in another experiment. You can reuse this then, right? And then and I would just hold on to this one until we're sure we're done using vegetable oil, and then you can throw it away. All right? These guys, since alcohol and water are water soluble, they'll be easier to clean. All right. So what you are going to do is you're going to take your 12 strips, all right, 4 of each are going to have one color. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so do your 3 different colored dots on the end. One thing that they were talking about setting these up in the tray first is you're going to fold them so that they'll sit into the tray. But then hang backwards like this across the other ones. All right, so you can go ahead and get the folds set up first and then add the dot. So something kind of like that. You might have to adjust your fold. You want to make sure that the strip is going to hit the bottom of the well when folded. Okay? Oh, I'm sorry, you can't even see it. Oh, no, you can. Okay. So go ahead and do that with all 12, and then we'll do the markings. All right, so I'm not going to walk you through this entire setup just because I feel like that would be really boring and not exactly the best use of your time. But your next step will be adding your markings. They should fall underneath the fold, so if they don't, you might have to readjust your fold. But remember, 4 of each color, and you're going to keep those colors together. There's one green one, and then I would do 3 more green ones, and then I would do 4 red ones, and 4 black ones. All right, I'll actually finish that setup after this recording's over, but what you're going to do now is that second vial of denatured alcohol, which I think I left in the room, so I will be right back. So that second vial, go ahead and get that one open. So again, pop off that seal on the top. You got nails, you might be able to rip it off, otherwise you might just have to puncture it, which isn't exactly the easiest thing in the world either. All right, and you're going to want to make sure that that vial, the only pipette you put in there is the alcohol. Then you've got your vegetable oil. All right, you're going to want to make sure that the only pipette that you put into the vegetable oil is the VO. And then you're also going to use water, which if you have distilled water, that is best. Again, if you don't have access to distilled water, maybe buy a bottle of water and just use that in place of distilled water. Because you can get distilled water, a gallon of it, for about $1 from the grocery store. It's just, you don't need a gallon for this class. But the water is going to go only with the water pipette. Okay? So, what you're going to do now is you're going to set up the bottom 12 wells in the order of the table in the book on page 4. All right, so the first one is going to be half a pipette of water, so to that like 1.5 mark. You'll have to play around with it to see how to get the water up there, up to that level. It does help. All right, so there's half the pipette water. I'm going to set my water one down. Half of my pipette alcohol. All right, and then I am noticing an issue here. The fact that my vial is now full, or my well is completely full, which is actually going to be too much liquid. So instead of paying attention to their half pipette rule, what I want you to do is I'm going to have you get some alcohol in your pipette and then just do 5 drops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drops of alcohol. and 5 drops of water. And we're going to do, in every single vial, we're going to have a total of 10 drops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so that first one is half water, half alcohol, so 5 drops, 5 drops. All right, next one is going to be vegetable oil. And since it's just one liquid, we're going to do 10 drops. All right, because you don't want these filled all the way to the top. If they're filled to the top, it's going to end up dipping your dot into the liquid, and then you're not going to have good results. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. And again, make sure that with that vegetable oil, you just use that dropper with vegetable oil. And then the next one should be 1 pipette of alcohol. So we're going to do 10 drops of just alcohol. I'm going to call it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So these pipettes do like to kind of start dropping right away. Something to watch out for. And the fourth one is going to be water. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. Go ahead and shake that around a little bit just to make sure that it's covering the bottom. And then you're going to repeat that pattern for the next 4 and repeat that pattern again for the last 4. And you're going to end up with each color. So in these first 4, you're going to do black, middle 4, do red, last 4, do blue or green, whichever color you end up sticking with. All right. So it hasn't been 20 minutes yet for the first part of the experiment. At this point, I'm going to let you do your own thing. I will include written instructions if anything has to change. Like if I find that the 10 drops isn't enough and we really need to do 20, I'll let you know. But that should work just fine for this first part. And then just to show you what, for the second part, just to show you what's going on with part 1, it's only been 10 minutes, so we're about halfway there. Let me change my camera view. All right, so if you look at it, you can see that the inks are traveling upwards, right? Eventually, after 20 minutes, or if you need to, you can give it just a little bit longer. Let them go as close to the top as possible. You should actually see different colors in the streaks. Right now, they haven't separated enough to get that out, but you should end up seeing different colors. And you'll see there's similar things in part 2 when you're done. So part 2, what you're really looking for, rather than the different colors, is going to be how the strips compare among the different solvents. So which solvent works the best, which makes the ink travel the farthest. Okay? So before I sign off on here, I just want to take a quick look at your questions. So, question 1 is your observations of part 1. Question 2 is your observations of part 2. Be very detailed here. All right? You should describe each strip of paper and what you see. Maybe give me some measurements. All right? Question 3 says which solvent caused the ink from the dots to move the most. So this is going to be a question that comes from part 2 of the lab. All right? Question 4 says what differences did you observe in how the different color inks were separated? All right? You can answer that from either part. It might be easier from part 1. Right, but that's where you're going to talk about what you see as far as differences in the different inks and what the different colored inks and what they look like when they're separated. And then questions 5 and 6 are actually tying this back to the unit. All right, what observations would lead you to believe the ink is actually a mixture? So you got to make sure you know what a mixture is. There's a whole lesson on that. And then you're given an unknown type of clothing dye. How would you use this procedure? How could you use the procedure in this lab to see if this dye is a mixture? Write out a detailed procedure and what you would expect to see if the dye is a mixture. Okay? So, good luck.